Do you keep hearing that you need to eat more protein or cut the carbs, but you struggle with figuring out what that actually means in practice or whether that's even right for you? Have you been thinking about introducing strength training, but worry about getting bulky, injuries, and how to even fit this into your already hectic schedule? Or maybe you've already been doing some lifting, but you're not seeing the progress that you'd expect. This episode is absolutely crammed with hugely important information for women over 35 who want to lose fat but feel overwhelmed with the exercise side of things. And I've got the brilliant Philip Pape with me today. I really enjoyed our conversation today. Philip is a nutrition coach and he is all about working smarter, not harder. Welcome to the Thriving Metabolism podcast. I'm Louise Digby, registered nutritional therapist, women's weight loss expert, and founder of the Nourish Method to lasting fat loss. Let's dive in. Okay, welcome back. So I'm here with Philip, and I'm really excited to talk with you today, Philip, because I just am looking forward to get into talking about muscle and protein and getting a bit more technical than we perhaps normally get with talking about this sort of thing on this show. So welcome to the podcast. So good to have you here. Perhaps you could start by telling us about your story and how you got into nutrition.
Sure, Louise. It's great to see you again. And I'm always excited to talk about this topic because as much as we talk about weight loss and dieting and things like that, I think building muscle can often be the thing that unlocks it for anyone, especially women over 40 in the peri-postmenopause phase of life. And what I like to do as I'll call myself a high performance nutrition coach, but the other term I use is a physique engineer. I like to help people understand their body down to the, even the numbers, but also how they feel, their biofeedback, all of the things that tell them what they're doing is giving them this output, right? And that way we can tailor things, fine tune them, be very precise. And it's not like we have to be turning knobs and tracking everything for the rest of our life, but we want to go through that phase of self-discovery. And I think it's super empowering, especially for women who have been struggling for years with what the industry has told them to do or what diet books say to do. And it just doesn't feel right. And now all of a sudden we understand, that's why X doesn't lead to Z for me. Let's figure out what actually works. So that's what I love doing every day, is helping clients and people on my podcast learn how to do that for themselves.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that term, physique engineer. It's so
I
it's
should
so
trademark
like
it. Yeah,
precise.
for sure.
But yeah, I love that you mentioned that all of this kind of tracking and monitoring and that precision doesn't have to be forever, because I think that can be a real turn off for a lot of people, but they also are aware that it kind of needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good to understand your process. So one of the things that I wanted to get into today was talking about kind of muscles for women over 40, because I talk a lot about how it's important to maintain your muscle mass after 40, because if you don't use it, you lose it. But I kind of wanted to get into it in a little bit more detail than I perhaps usually do. So perhaps it would be helpful if we could start with digging into why is it so important for women over 40 to actually be working on maintaining their muscle mass?
Sure. So every human being starts to lose muscle mass, right? And it happens pretty early in our life, probably in our 30s, where we start to lose anywhere from 3 to 5% of our muscle mass every decade. For women, this process gets accelerated, and there's two things at play. One is the fact that you're a woman and you start with a lower baseline level of muscle mass just through puberty, which doesn't mean you can't build the same percentage of muscle mass over time, but you start with a little disadvantage there. The other thing is during peri and postmenopause, estrogen declines, right? And we know that estrogen actually is very important for muscle repair and regeneration, in addition to testosterone, which also declines. And then that speeds up the muscle loss. And so it's good to know the premise, like this is this terrible thing that happens and it's even worse for women, but it's also good to know that we can do something about it.
Yeah, because we often hear that we lose muscle after the age of 35-ish, but it's never really explained why that happens. And the decline in your hormones are a real key part of that. So when women are going through this perimenopausal transition and they are starting to lose muscle, is it something that is quite achievable to prevent that muscle decline and start building muscle again?
100%. I mean, studies have shown we could build new muscle till, I used to say the 70s and 80s, but a recent study showed people in their 90s were building new muscle tissue. So unless you're planning to live past 100 and and all of a sudden it drops off, which I'm sure it never really does, yes, you can build muscle at any point, and you should build muscle. And to kind of add to the thing for women with estrogen is that bone density and osteopenia that leads to osteoporosis is a big concern for women as well. And strength training can help that. That's another age-related concern. It leads to fractures. It picks up in your, 50s and 60s especially. And then there's, of course, all the benefits of strength training beyond that we can get into, not to mention the short-term benefits in mental health and endorphins, all that fun stuff. So I'm a huge fan of lifting weights for women of all age.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll get into talking more about lifting weights and strength training. But I'm really glad that you mentioned the bone density, because I
Mhm.
think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And it's kind of just something that's mentioned as, oh, as we get older, women are very prone to osteopenia, osteoporosis, and it's never really given much kind of airtime. But it's something that is incredibly important for us to talk about, because if you lose bone density, then it's very detrimental for your overall health. And if you're at a higher risk of fractures and breaks, that is something that's very highly correlated with a quite a rapid decline in lifespan. So yeah, the strength training, it's not just about managing your body weight, but actually your overall longevity.
Absolutely. I think body weight gets disproportionate attention, almost to the point where I've gone the other direction and said, let's not even worry about body weight. Let's take care of all these other things first. And you'll find that body weight becomes actually an easy thing to achieve once you've dealt with the other things. But if you just kind of fast forward the clock and you say, okay, starting in your 30s and 40s, when you look at your peers, and this might be yourself if you're listening, and you just notice that it gets harder to keep the body you had before, keep the energy you had before, even keep the shape you had before, even at the same scale weight, because of this muscle loss and because of this bone density loss. And you fast forward that into your 50s, 60s, and beyond, it is almost completely correlated with metabolic disease, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and then all the frailty that leads to you falling, breaking a hip, going to the hospital, getting put on medication, getting put on more medications because of the side effects of those medications, and never really coming out of that. And I've seen that personally with women in my life, men too, but especially women, especially because women tend to just be smaller, and these things compound with the hormones. And, not to paint a dire picture, but again, we can do something about it, which is what the message needs to be to everyone out there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely such an important message. So I had a message from a listener, and I would love to get your thoughts on this message because it really ties in with what we're talking about. So I'll just read it out to you. She said, I believe I have a hormone imbalance, but I'm not getting anywhere with the doctor. Interestingly, I saw a physio for my hip pain this week, and without me mentioning hormones, she said she thinks my muscle issue with the hip could be hormone related, possibly low estrogen. And there's more, but it's kind of like extra information that we don't necessarily need to get into this. So what are your thoughts on that?
There's a couple thoughts. So let me go one bit at a time here. So not getting anywhere with a doctor. First of all, I want to empathize with that because that is very common for people to have issues with the traditional medical industry for a lot of reasons. One is the training in the medical industry and hormones. There isn't always a link to that, and there isn't easy solutions aren't necessarily available other than lots and lots of testing and blood work and lab work. And it doesn't mean you have to work with a functional practitioner necessarily. You can find medical doctors who are willing to work with you, but you have to take control of your own health here and find the doctor that's going to listen to you and work with you and not gaslight you, right? Like, so that's the first thing that comes to mind when I hear something like this, which I'm glad the listener is seeking other options. So the physio for the hip pain and mentioning estrogen, we just talked about that, right? That estrogen causes muscle loss. And I wouldn't say that, I think most hormone imbalances for women that I've come across with clients, I would say 90% plus can be addressed through lifestyle. There may be a need for some HRT, for example, but usually there's a lifestyle component missing, and then it just exacerbates the hormone symptoms, and it looks like a hormone imbalance. Like we're switching root cause here, the cause and effect. I would say that if this listener is not lifting weights, right? That's what we're going to talk about in this episode. I don't know. You gave me some of the background before, didn't mention any exercise or movement, right, from the listener. Yeah. So if the listener is lifting weights, honestly, that's like number one on my list besides sufficient calories, sufficient protein, sleep, and stress management, right? When it comes to these. So I don't know if we want to get more into that. I'm looking at the details you sent me about taking all these supplements and finding out she had deficiencies in like B12 and whatnot. And she's getting them tested, which is great. She's testing for deficiencies, trying to plug those gaps, which I always prefer starting with nutrition and then seeing what's left, right? Like B12 usually is solved through animal products, but if you're a vegan or vegetarian, that's going to be a problem. So you need supplementation. Magnesium tends to be another deficiency. And then the rest is just proper whole foods and in enough of them. She might be dieting. I don't know, Louise, without more context.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's super helpful. And just to add a couple of things to what you've said, and this is something that I think we talked about a little bit when I was on your podcast, is that hormones are so often the scapegoat. And, we talk about hormones as if they are the root cause, but actually they're still just a symptom. And we need to go a little bit deeper than that and look at, well, what's causing the issue with the hormones? Yes, there could be a transition happening where you're becoming perimenopausal, menopausal, but that's a natural transition. And there could be things that are exaggerating that decline in hormones, things like inflammation and deficiencies and lack of muscle and gut issues and all sorts of things. So we want to go a level deeper and try and understand, well, why have we got hormone issues going on? And then the other thing that I would also add is that so often when you go to the doctors with, well, any issue, but I think particularly joint issues, you're kind of just told it's a case of pain management or it's a case of not using it. So you might get told not to exercise, or you might get told just to take painkillers, or you might get told that you've just got to wait until it gets worse and then you'll have a hip replacement, a knee replacement, and that sort of thing. But I'm sure you see this with your clients as well. I see in my clients that so often joint problems resolve when you get to the underlying cause of that inflammation and irritation. And I've seen quite a few people who have been on the waiting list for a knee replacement who have managed to either postpone it quite a long time or actually come off that waiting list altogether.
Yeah, I do want to mention, you're right. The hip pain, I didn't really dive in on, and because the lifting weights part came back to me time and again. When people say I have knee pain or hip pain or back pain, that's one of the first things I want to diagnose is their movement. Not only do they lift weights, but are they sitting all day? Because sitting all day can be very detrimental and cause these pains because of all the misalignment. And actually there's a hormonal effect of sitting around too long as well. Are they walking? Are they moving? And are they lifting? Because oftentimes simply squatting or deadlifting or something and starting to use that tissue and use that bone and muscle around it will, again, resolve some of this pain.
Yeah, that's so true. And I also just want to quickly say thank you to the listener for sending us that question, because it's super helpful to help us to give a real life example and expand the conversation. So I want to get into a couple of myths, because I think there's a lot of myths around strength training, weightlifting, and women's health generally. And I think we've kind of covered one of them, which one of them I wanted to go into was about not being able to build muscle as you get older. So I think we've very much debunked that. A big one that I hear quite a lot is, I don't want to do strength training, weightlifting because I don't want to get bulky. So perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
How often do you hear that still, Louise? Because I know it's a myth, but how I'm just curious, how often do you still hear that?
Quite often.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd say
Yeah.
I'm hearing it at least like a few times a month, when I'm trying to encourage someone to cut down a bit on the cardio because they're perhaps doing a little bit too much and driving up their cortisol levels.
Yeah.
Then think about switching to more strength training. Yeah, I get a little bit of pushback on it.
Because you know what happens with me? I think people come to me, have heard me say so much about this that they've already like absorbed the message
Mm.
that you won't get bulky. And anyway, that's the message that I want to talk about. First of all, the joke I always say is like, as a guy, I would love to get bulky, and it's very, very, very hard to do because testosterone is a big trigger behind that, and the amount of muscle mass you have is behind that. And while women can build the same relative percentage of muscle mass as men. So I'm putting that out there, very empowering. Like whatever muscle mass you have now, you can build at the same rate as a man to get to where you would be like big and look like what you're thinking of, maybe a female bodybuilder, for example, where you've got this intense training, like Arnold style training 2 a days, probably on PEDs, right? Probably very, very, very strict dieting so that the muscles pop out and all sorts of other manipulation. That's not what you're doing. Like the everyday person's not doing that. And there's nothing but good things about building muscle if what you're going for is the lean, toned look. Like if you're looking for that look, that is what you're going to get. And one of the games I like to play with when I'll show women a picture like of an athlete, for example, and ask them to guess the weight. And it's usually about 30 to 40 pounds lower than the woman actually weighs because she looks lean and lithe and sinewy and toned and all those great things that we associate with a amazing physique. But it's all muscle. It's dense. Muscle's denser than fat. We know that. So you're not gonna get bulky. You're just not. If you want the look you're going for, you have to build muscle. Period.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I know
it
we
takes
agree
a
on
lot
that.
of work, a lot of work to
Yes,
build
takes a lot of
build
work.
muscle. Yeah, that's the main takeaway there. So while we're talking about that, then is it possible to build muscle and lose fat at the same time?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Body recomp, definitely
Mhm.
possible. It's easier when you're doing everything, when you're dialed in, with your nutrition and you're tracking properly so you kind of know what dials to turn and you're lifting. For newer lifters who haven't been training for more than like a year or two, it's very common. It happens all the time where you maintain your scale weight and the inches drop on your
Mm.
waist and your biceps might go up a bit and your lifting is progressing. And so I'm throwing out all these numbers and metrics because that's how you tell that this is happening. It also helps you not get discouraged because you're like, well, the weight's not moving, but I'm actually looking better and feeling better. And we have to reframe what's really important. I talk a lot about body recomp, Louise, in terms of like, you can recomp while gaining weight. You can recomp while losing weight. It's really just either short-term versus long-term recomp. My version of recomp that I like over the long term is when you're brand new, you try to get some recomp in the first few months, but then pick a direction. Like pick a direction. Do you want to get some fat loss or do you want to build muscle? It'll be more efficient, more time efficient that way. And you can always go the other direction. And then you could align it with your life, with the seasons, with your vacations, with just when you want to eat more or eat less. And that way it's more sustainable. And then you will still get body recomp, but over like a year or two or three. But it's actually more effective recomp than if you just stayed at maintenance for, like 5 years.
Yeah. So you're essentially talking about having like a fat loss phase, a muscle gain phase.
Cuts
Is that
and
right?
bulks if you want to use
Yeah.
the lingo. Yeah.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah, for sure.
So while we're talking about strength training, then I feel perhaps we should be a little bit more specific than using the general term strength training. So for someone who is wanting to lose fat and gain muscle, or at least maintain lean muscle, what sort of strength training are we talking about?
We are talking about any form that challenges your muscles to grow and adapt. So usually that's free weights like dumbbells or barbells. I love barbells. They're a great tool for the job, but not everybody has access or wants to, or for whatever reason. Machines and cables. You could also use body weight. You could also use bands. Usually you outgrow those things in terms of strength if you're doing it right. So I like to focus on principles rather than specific exercises or methods because the programming and the methods all come out of that. And the two things I find women especially can work on the most early on is the execution of the form, right? Because if you're not executing a lift properly, you're leaving a lot on the table in terms of how efficient you are in moving the weight, but also chance of injury, and you're going to get frustrated at not making progress. So execution is very, very important. And honestly, if you have to take a whole month of just doing form check videos, sending them to your coach or being in a community and doing that to get it right, do that. Because some people are not athletically inclined, let's just put it that way. And some are. I've had clients that like on day one, whoa, that's amazing. Like you're good. And others that I have to give them like 10 different feedback videos before they get there. That's fine. So execution. The other one is the intensity of your training. And so this is where I'll ask you, if you've been going to the gym for years and lifting the 10-pound pink dumbbells and haven't changed and you've been doing the same reps, you're not getting stronger. You're not building muscle. The expression of strength is that you can push more force. And so that shows up as 10-pound this week, then 12 and a half next time, then 15 next time, then, and I should be talking in kilograms, but people
That's
understand.
okay.
We understand. So the intensity, meaning not that you're sweating or getting sore, but that you have a program set of exercises with program sets and reps. And from this session to next session, something has gone up and you're pushing yourself close to that failure point. That's the principle of progressive overload. That's the principle of proximity to failure. And that's what will get you bigger and stronger over time to build that muscle.
And that's necessary to help with the fat loss side of things as well, to be kind of making that progress each time with your workouts.
Actually, it's huge. You cannot lose exclusively fat unless you're training. You're training hard, you're training heavy. I shouldn't use the word heavy, is very subjective because it depends on the reps and everything. But when you want to lose fat, you've got to do it by either losing weight while lifting, right, and eating a lot of protein so you hold onto the muscle, or try to body recomp like we talked about earlier, where you're kind of slowly losing fat and building muscle at the same time and the scale weight isn't changing. One phenomenon that occurs in the population who diets, who yo-yo diets, and women listening, if you've been through your 20 or 30 diets by now, which by the time women are like the end of their life, it's like 100 diets or something. It's crazy. If you weren't lifting weights, you were losing muscle while you lost that weight. And that's why I think weight loss isn't what's important. Because if you're losing muscle, now you have, you're weaker. It affects your bone density. You're accelerating the muscle loss even more because you're dieting, right? It affects your hormones. It downregulates your hormones. It puts you in a low energy state. You're weak. You don't have energy. Like all the symptoms you get could be just because you're not eating enough and you've been dieting all the time. If, however, you eat enough and fuel yourself, and then at some point, now you've been training, you've got your habits in place, I'm going to go for fat loss. I'm going to take 3 months to do it, and I'm going to do it very precisely while training, you're going to lose almost predominantly fat. And that's how we take 10, 15, 20 pounds of that little extra fat, belly fat, wherever we were trying to target off. And then we get back to maintenance and we're eating food, we're eating carbs, for example. We can get into that, and fueling yourself. So I don't know if I went off on a tangent, Louise, but I'm excited about this
it's
stuff.
great. And it reminded me of a stat that always sticks in my head, which is, I think when you do kind of like a faddy diet, whatever the definition of that was in the study, I can't remember, but whenever you do a faddy diet, about 40% of the weight that you lose is actually muscle rather than
It's
fat.
huge. Yes.
Whereas when you take a more measured approach where you're getting the right nutrition, you're getting enough protein, actually you may still lose some muscle potentially at phases, but it's going to be far, far less, maybe 10%. And that difference is huge.
Even less, like 1%. Like if you're doing it right, you're not going to lose much muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, that difference is massive, because when you go on holiday and perhaps step off plan a little bit, your metabolism's going to be higher because you've lost less muscle. But also if you do put some weight back on, it's less of it is going to be fat, because when you regain weight, if you kind of fall off track and you regain weight after doing a fatty diet, you're not regaining the muscle you've lost. You're just regaining fat, right?
Yeah, you're exacerbating it. Yes.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's
what leads to being skinny fat. Like, I don't know if people like that term or what, but the idea that you go up and down and up and down and up and down over years on these diets, and let's say you weigh the same thing when you're 45 you did when you were 25, but you just don't look the same. You have the muffin top, you have the flabbiness, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's because you have more fat, less muscle. So you're fatter, but you're not like bigger, Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk a little bit more about exercise and strength training in a particular episode called Should I Be Working Out Harder After 40? But for now, I want to get more into the protein side of things with you, because I always get so many questions about protein. So we've touched on it a little bit already, but why is protein so important for building muscle and losing fat?
Yeah, I mean, think of protein as like the bricks of your house and your house, right? That you need them to build the muscle, period. Like if we just start from the muscle building side, you cannot add new muscle tissue unless you have enough protein. So if you're just constantly underfed with protein and you're a woman and you're getting older, boom, 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 they stack on top of each other to result in even more muscle loss. So even if you're not training, eating higher muscle can at least preserve, or higher protein can at least preserve muscle. And we've actually seen in untrained populations and studies that where they increase their protein a lot, we've seen their body composition improve even without training. We've actually seen tiny bit of muscle tissue get added even without training, and then fat get lost at the same time. And it's because your body was craving those building blocks, those amino acids, right? So it's muscle repair, muscle growth. And then as we talked about during fat loss, it preserves your muscle. And some people are surprised to hear this, but during fat loss, you tend to need more protein than when you're not in fat loss to compensate for the fact that you have less overall energy coming in.
And as the research that I've read has said that our protein requirements go up as we get
Yes.
older. But interestingly, we tend to eat less as we get older. And that can be for lots of reasons. You know, sometimes it could be because of problems with teeth and actually chewing protein, or it could be problems with digestion or appetite. And
Appetite, yeah.
actually, if we can address those issues at their source with proper dental health and making sure that the gut is functioning properly, we have enough stomach acid, then that can help us to digest our protein properly and help us to actually have the appetite for that protein as well, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting angle you're coming from, Louise, right? I don't often, my clients know me. It's like, you're going to eat this much protein, right? So let's get there. Let's like no excuses. And I suppose there are workarounds for things like, hey, you could take protein shakes, right? If like digestion's a concern. It's interesting that there are challenges with getting the amount of protein we're supposed to get, which is somewhere around like 1.5 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So I usually say in pounds, like around 1 gram per pound, because we're just not used to it. It sounds like so much. And now you're saying, oh, do I have to eat like steak all the time and chicken, and I have to eat eggs and dairy? And, people go to those things, but there's plant-based as well. There's digestible types of protein. There's a whole world that it opens up for you. But you're right. It creates challenges like fullness. Satiety, the satiety level of protein is so much higher than fats and carbs, but that's a great thing you could take advantage of, especially during fat loss, or especially to get a more whole food based diet, because now you're protein first, you're protein focused. It kind of crowds out, right, the other stuff. It crowds out whether it's sugar or processed foods or whatever. It tends to crowd those things out without you just cutting them out. So that I mentioned protein, and I can't remember what it was. Oh yes, protein also has the highest thermic effect of feeding, so it burns more calories. So if you want to, I've seen women who their metabolism jumps by like 100 or 200 calories a day just from increasing protein. Like, isn't that a great thing? So yeah, it's the benefits far outweigh the challenges, but I get we need to address the challenges when they exist.
Yeah, these are all really great points, because I think we, always just think, okay, protein, build muscle, need to eat more protein to build muscle. But actually, there's so many more benefits of protein, like keeping you more full, burning more calories just from digesting it. And then also, we need protein to make hormones and for all sorts of various different processes in the body. So if we're not having enough protein, not only are we going to struggle to feel full, and we're going to be struggling with more cravings, and we're going to struggle to build muscle, but our hormones are going to be struggling as well. So it really is always the first thing that I talk about when trying to give like general tips for fat
Yeah.
loss and hormone support.
Yeah. In fact, to add to that, if you didn't want to track, if you didn't want to do all this other stuff, start with protein and fiber. Like right there, you just killed so many, or not killed, you just solved so many problems.
Yeah.
We talked about satiety. It makes a more whole food diet. Same thing with fiber. Now fiber causes you to go out and look at, well, what has fiber? Well, it's a lot of plant sources, fruits and whole grains and vegetables. And there's different types of fiber. And I learned recently a neat little idea from Justin Cottle. He's like a human anatomy expert, and he very expert on the gut as well. And he said, try to get different types of fiber of the same kind, meaning like apples, eat different types of apples because there's different pectin compounds in the skin, and that'll feed your bacteria. So fiber's food for your bacteria in your gut. The more diversity, the more you support all the microbiome diversity in your gut. And then that plus the protein effectively gives you the plate that you want, like the meals that you want to construct come from those, and you almost can just eat whatever else you want. It kind of works out for most people.
Yeah, definitely. That's always my philosophy, is start with what your body needs, the protein, the fiber, and then whatever comes around that, your appetite is going to regulate the
Hmm.
rest of it. Your body is very good at regulating sugar and cravings, all those things when you've got the core foundations in
For sure.
place. So that is such a good message. So there's a couple of specific challenges that I think women who are in that mid stage of life have. And I think lack of time is
Mm.
a really big one. So what would you say to someone who knows that they need to do more strength training, perhaps knows that they need to be eating more protein, who is struggling with a lack of time? Are there some like hacks or tips that you might have?
For sure. I mean, ladies, I'm the epitome of not having enough time because I do so much during the day. I don't like to sleep that much. I like to work out. But what I would do, so a few hacks or tips. The first one is to list the things that are most important to you and pick those top 2 or 3 things, which for a lot of you might be, okay, I want to start training now after I listen to Philip on this show. I want to start training. Sleep. I want to get enough sleep. And those might be the 2 things. And then work your schedule around those. Don't work those around your schedule, right? Very simple tip. But if you just sat down right now and said, oh, actually, I need to expand my sleeping window, or I need to carve out that hour, hour and a half for my workouts. And then if what you're trying to do in the schedule department isn't working or being consistent, like you're trying to work out at 4 p.m., but now you have to pick up your kid or you have to make dinner or some event comes up or you take them to a sporting event, make those hard choices of like, do I need to move my schedule around and put it into the morning, for example, right? Just so that I absolutely get it done. But as far as training efficiency, I really love this topic, Louise, because people think they have to spend hours and hours and hours working out. I think you can go to the gym 2 or 3 days a week for no more than an hour and then walk, and you can have an amazing physique and health and muscle mass and all that, and you can do it efficiently. And this is again where when you go to the gym, prioritizing compound lifts, right? Multi-joint exercises like squats, deadlifts, RDLs, presses, bench presses, like anything that uses multiple joints, because now you're using more muscle mass for the same amount of time, and they're very effective. So that's efficient. Secondly, you don't have to work out 5, 6, 7 days a week. I kind of alluded to that. So if you're worried about time from that perspective, you don't have to. And then the third thing is there are techniques you can do in the gym to shorten the time. You know, there's supersetting, there's techniques where you don't have to take full rest periods, little things like that. We don't have to get into all those here. I could, but I could do a whole podcast episode about that. They're intensity techniques to shorten the time.
Mm.
I think that answers the question. I mean, you mentioned food as well. I don't think eating well should take more time is kind of where my philosophy on that. I think
Mm.
if you do a little bit of prep and planning for your week, and then you tie that into your grocery shopping, and then carve out just like an hour or 2 on the weekend to prep, you can save a lot of time during the week. And you can look at that as an act of self-care. It's like, I'm taking care of my future self this week by just doing a little prep now. And if you're eating at home, for the most part, it's going to work out. If you're trying to go out and stuff like that, it gets a little bit harder. Even though it's convenient, it gets a little bit harder to hit your goals.
But not impossible. You know,
Right,
lots of
not
places that you
impossible.
go to, you can order, you know, a protein like a steak or fish with some seasonal vegetables or something like
100%,
that.
100%. Yep.
Not in all places, of course, but there are plenty of places like that. So, you know, I think it's so important that we do still go out for dinner and we do still socialize and do the things that we want to do. But if we're
Oh,
doing it
heck
a
yeah.
lot,
Oh,
then we
yeah.
need to just be savvy about the choices that we're making.
Yeah. Let me clarify my context for that statement was just that the excuse that I can't eat at home because it takes too much time. That was
Mm.
what I was trying to combat, and that you can actually make it very efficient. You know, again, women who have families and they're maybe the caregiver and they're worried about like making dinner every night and maybe their kids eat different things. That's a different problem we can talk about. I know a solution to that, but you may not like it.
Oh, I'd
Just
love to
doing
hear
no, just doing some simple prep and planning of your meals will save that time is my
it.
point. Yeah.
Hmm.
Leftovers too.
Yeah.
Don't forget
Yeah,
leftovers.
leftovers. Big fan of leftovers
Don't
over
waste
here.
the food, leftovers. Make
Yes.
more of it. Just make 4 times as much as you need. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And then another big challenge that I've started experiencing myself is that you're more prone to injuries and
Mm.
joint pain, and it can take longer to recover from workouts in some cases. So I think that can make a lot of people quite hesitant to try new things or to to push themselves. So
Mhm.
how do you manage that, or how do you approach that when you know that perhaps you're a little bit injury prone?
That is that the fact that you are injury prone right there is self-talk, right? That I
Mm,
would want to address with a client to say like is that true, or is that just what has happened in the past?
yeah.
You know, because at the end of the day, like a, a human being's a human being. You may have certain conditions that prevent mobility or flexibility, or there's maybe certain tightness you have, or maybe you had a past injury or surgery that's causing you to be unable to do a certain movement. There are a million ways to move the human body, and there are a million ways to do the big movement patterns that are natural to us, picking things up, hinging, squatting, pushing. There's so many ways to do it that there really isn't an excuse at the end of the day from that perspective. Like, oh, I've got a wonky shoulder, so I can't bench press. Okay,
Mm,
I'll show you 20 other things we can try that will still build your chest and build your shoulders. So I would say that's one. Another one is form, which I alluded to earlier. Many people get the injuries because of poor form, or because they're doing too much, or because they're not eating enough or sleeping enough.
mhm.
And so, ladies, again, we talk about the eating enough calories thing here. That affects your recovery. That affects your injury proneness in the gym.
Yeah.
Just it intuitively when you go into the gym and you already feel tired when you start the session, and then you feel kind of drained and wiped out. That's going to give you fatigue, low level fatigue at least, that causes you to miss a rep or causes you to push that last rep and not use proper form.
Mm,
So it all comes together, right? Sleep, stress, recovery, food, proper form, proper programming, not doing too much. Here's another one, Louise, not doing too much, as in you don't want to be doing tons of cardio,
yeah.
like tons of cardio between all your workout sessions, because that's going to impede with your recovery as well and could lead to injury. And many of us get injured outside the gym. Let's be honest. We get injured
Yes.
doing other stuff, trying to pick up that box the wrong way, or
Mhm.
twisting, things like that. So you can kind of tell I have the attitude of like, I don't want you to make excuses, but I'm compassionate and I hear your concerns, and let's address where that concern really comes from.
Yeah.
Going back to our root cause discussion before, it's a new identity you're trying to aspire to now, is this like athlete doing everything the right way. Let's do a reset. Let's figure out what works for you.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point for us to kind of question where our resistance is coming from,
Hmm.
when we hear ourselves making excuses, because so often they're not actually rooted in truth. They're
Hmm.
more rooted in fear or just misconceptions. And when we challenge them, we allow ourselves to grow and move forward. So that's such
Yes.
a an important thing to highlight. So before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask whether there's anything that you feel like we've missed, or any common questions that you get that we haven't covered today.
I mean, a couple come to mind if we're talking about women over 40. One is menopause symptoms come up a lot, which obviously I can't personally relate to, but neither could like a 25-year-old woman working with another woman. So let's be honest. Hot flashes, right? Like sleep interruption, mood fluctuations, all of those things. I've seen an improvement with that just from strength training. Like it's insane how the hormones and your body like crave to be challenged in our physical environment. It's like in our DNA. So if you have those sorts of symptoms and you're not training yet, again, let's get training and see what happens. Track
Mhm.
things, see what happens. The second one is carbs. Like, can I eat carbs?
Mm,
That's the other one that comes up all the time, because I hear a lot of misinformation about, well, now that you're perimenopausal, you need to do low carb. Like there's some sort of link. And when it comes to diet and macros, it's variable. There's a huge spectrum of what you need and what you thrive on. And the low carb marketing has made it where that's like the default, which I think is terrible, because you're not giving you a chance to see how much you could thrive with a higher level of carbs.
mm,
And there's a lot of confounding things. Like people think of pizza and donuts as carbs, but really they're carbs and fat, right? They're processed ingredients mushed together with a high density of carbs and fat. By carbs, I mean fruit and rice and oats and starches and all those, things. So if you're under fueling, you're probably also under fueling with carbs, right?
yeah.
So that's why when I start working with women, and you probably do something similar, we want to get them fed up to at least their maintenance calories, just to get all the variables like out of the way and see
Mhm.
where the real issues are. And if one of your issues is that you don't recover well, you feel sore all the time, and you're struggling to push the lifts, and your carbs are like sub 100 grams, that could be a huge opportunity right off the bat to get them up to say 200 or more. and then see what happens. And I will say, I've never seen this backfire, but I've often seen it help.
Mm.
I've never seen it back like somebody, oh, so many carbs, I'm bloated and I don't feel great. I haven't seen that. I know some people do thrive on lower carb diets, but it seems like the majority of humans just like a balanced plate. And that
Yeah.
includes a decent amount of this beautiful macro that immediately is used as a source of energy by your brain and your body, will help you recover, will help you sleep, will help your hormones, will help you lift weights. And the studies show time and time again, between two populations, one low carb, one high, you will build a lot more muscle with more carbs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an important part of muscle building, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really glad that you mentioned about how pizza and that sort of thing, they're not just carbs, they're carbs and fats,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what is so addictive, is
Yeah.
that combination of fats and carbs. And I feel that the conversation overall should shift from low carb to low processed food, ultra processed food, because that is the thing that is so inflammatory, so disruptive, so
Mm-hmm.
addictive. And if we can focus more on eating a whole food diet with just, minimal amounts of the processed, ultra processed stuff, then that right there is going to do more for our health than probably most other things we can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I love carbs. So,
Don't we all?
and most people don't mind once they find out that they could eat more carbs, that it's like, it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. I've just got to be savvy about it. Um, Philip, I've loved this conversation. It's been so interesting. I think it is, this episode has been jam-packed with just
Mm-hmm.
so many things for people to take away. I know that you have a guide that our listeners can download. So perhaps you could tell us about that, and also about how people can connect with you.
Sure. Yeah. I love giving out freebies. This one is called the Muscle Building Nutrition Blueprint, and it just walks through everything you need to know to build muscle. And the reason I want to share it with your community is because I could share all the dieting and fat loss stuff. I'm sure you cover that extensively. I think the focusing on the other side of like eating and fueling and building is one where people are a little bit fearful of, women sometimes fearful of, but also there's a lot of misinformation and they don't know how to do it. So it walks you through that. And then there's a whole appendix that's like my recent muscle building journey that shows you all the data and all the like things to do and collect along the way. It's very comprehensive. So I'll share
Wow,
that.
sounds
Yeah.
amazing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll link that in the show notes. And then how can people connect with you online?
Sure. I would say check out the podcast, Wits and Weights. If you're watching, you can see it here, but it's Wits and Weights, and then Instagram at Wits and Weights.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been so good. And yeah, thanks again.
Awesome, Louise. It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you have a question for me for the podcast, then you can ask me by visiting speakpipe.com/Louise Digby. And this is where you can record a voice note for me to listen to and answer on the podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, then please make sure you subscribe or you hit follow on Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube. And I'd be so grateful if you took just 30 seconds to leave me a really quick review. Now, to leave you with a word of empowerment, which I think is very fitting because I think it was such an empowering episode. Remember that don't let overwhelm and overthinking keep you stuck. Don't wait to take action, or don't wait for willpower or motivation to come to you. We create motivation by taking action. Action creates momentum, and momentum keeps us motivated. And you can really harness your motivation and nurture it by taking one small step today. And that could be as simple as drinking a little bit more water, upping your protein a little bit, or perhaps reaching out to someone who can help. I'll see you in the next one.